Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only talk about things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, mechanics, etc., is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I am Daniel Radford, author, cyborg, and also your host. And today I'm joined by my loyal sidekick, John Kernan, as we begin our fourth cycle for the year. This time we're looking into sci fi stories.
The host spoke in haste. Haha. Wordplay. I am a robot.
Oh, God. Unfortunately, the cyborg enhancements don't do anything about my sinuses, so if I God damn, Jesus, fuck. If I sound a little different or wrong today, that would be why. Other than the stumbling over my words, that's a lack of sleep.
They don't have cyborg enhancements for replacing sinuses yet unless you want to replace your entire frontal lobe, and that's just not worth it.
Yeah. Anyway, sci-fi is another really quite broad theme to work with this time. We're really challenging ourselves this year, it seems. Maybe not quite as broad as our like drama segment was, but pretty broad,
There's a lot of sci-fi.
and it's quite diverse. It's broad enough that I think even though most people have an idea of what sci-fi is in their heads, it's probably worth just reiterating it with a bit of a definition. Because a lot of people have a very narrow view of what sci-fi is, despite how broad it despite its broadness.
Something I find really funny about sci-fi is I think it's not the only one, but I think it's one of only a very few genres where it's so broad, yet so many of it, yet it has so many properties that are so big and so long running. There's only a couple genres you can say this about, but sci-fi has a number of people who are like, yeah, I like sci-fi, but their idea of sci-fi is literally one thing.
Yeah,
Like, there are a lot of people who they like sci-fi, and what they actually mean is they like Star Trek. There's a lot of people who what they mean is they like Star Wars. And there's a couple people out there who what they mean is like, yeah, I played Dead Space that one time. Oh, that shit was scary.
yeah. So science fiction is basically a type of speculative fiction. It generally deals with futuristic concepts rooted in like advanced technology and science, and it ranges from the slightly more advanced than we have now tech to the distant future and superior alien technology. Basically, anything
Almost
that
like a
falls in that
genre born
window,
purely of the impatience of humanity.
almost a bit, yeah.
Technology in real life isn't moving fast enough, and we can't stop thinking about what it's going to be like later.
But I mean, the thing as well, though, right, is that any story rooted in some sort of theoretical science also counts. It doesn't have to be space.
No, it doesn't. Not really. It pretty much just has to include science that at this point is fictional.
It doesn't even have to be technology. It can be biological sciences.
Yeah, I mean, like Alien would be sci-fi even without the science part of it. Well, I should say even without the technology. Not that the Alien series really isn't that sci-fi though, outside of the aliens and the spaceships considering how crappy those computers are.
I think a really, really like sort of good example is what we've come back to a lot recently is the swarm.
Swarm's a good one.
Because the technology in the swarm all pretty much exists. It's not far-flung future tech or alien tech or anything like that. The science present in it is all either completely real or it is theoretical science that does not require an advance in our technology. But because of the way what it is based around, this theoretical scientific entity of the Euro, it is by default science fiction on top of being an ego thriller.
Yeah. Yeah, the term is kind of both very open to interpretation, but also literal at the same time. If it is a fiction, where the story either revolves around or has science as a core part of how it exists and moves forward, great, it's infectious. Um, you can call it science fiction.
Like, yeah, you got your advanced technology, rogue AI, machine uprising, aliens, time travel, parallel universes, dystopia, utopia, etc. Sci-fi can be a lot of different things with a lot of very distinct vibes. And yet it is all because it is rooted in science, either theoretical or real. It is all sci-fi.
Yeah, it's also one of those genres that's equally capable of being the whole genre or a subgenre. Like, you know, people a lot of times easily think of post-apocalyptic stories as sci-fi, but plenty of them aren't. I wouldn't call I wouldn't call Mad Max sci-fi at all, even a little bit. Fallout, on the other hand, is post-apocalyptic and sci-fi.
Yeah, sci-fi is one of those interesting genres that is almost always feels like it's paired with something else. I'm starting to I mean, we've said it before, but that is honestly starting to sound like most genres, but, it's very rare. Well, not very rare. I think maybe less rare than with a lot of other genres, to be fair. But it is fairly common for a sci-fi story to also be a thriller or horror, or also action, or also fantasy, or also drama, comedy.
Yeah,
Spaceballs exists.
the only there's definitely more reasons for it, but it's like the only real thing I can think of for that is like I get the feeling perhaps that if you try to make things pure sci-fi, it might not be that hard to drift into the area of, oh, this entire story sounds like one big long hypothesis with a narrative attached to it.
I mean, that's not always a bad thing, and it does. Like, there are stories which I would say are more or less pure sci-fi, or at least a majority sci-fi. But it
Oh,
sometimes, right?
absolutely.
But sometimes, at least to me, it almost feels like sci-fi is often more of a setting than a genre.
You're right. A lot of times it is more an aspect of the setting than it is an aspect of the story itself, besides the part that the story obviously lives in the setting.
Like, exactly how like, it's almost a pipeline from genre to setting, exactly where any given media property sits on that, spectrum. Whilst a lot of stories are focused on the technology itself, sure, a lot of the time, stories in sci-fi are a lot more interested in using the quirks of the setting to make a political or like, a point about a political or moral issue, or just about human nature and philosophy, right?
Yeah, that's a constant thing in Star Wars, and you can't take 2 steps in Star Wars without running into some sort of sci-fi technology. Every single inch of that world is filled to the brim with it, and it's still rarely the actual topic of an individual story.
Yeah, like Star Wars is a fantastic example because even though the world is so deeply futuristic, the technology almost never has anything to do with the plots.
Yeah, like, other than occasionally providing a MacGuffin. Gotta get the Death Star plans, gotta get the storm generator thing, oh, is that a lightsaber? Those are cool. That's no different than going after a chosen special sword, but it's shiny.
You could take the story of Star Wars, just about all of it, transpond it into a modern day or even like medieval fantasy setting, and the story would be almost completely unchanged.
Oh, yeah, especially the original movies. Luke is literally a monomyth.
Those movies were definitely modeled after the hero's journey, but it's such an interesting thing about sci-fi, right? Is that it's one of those strange parts of the like mechanics of storytelling where it can be the absolute hard focus of a story so easily. You know, you get that with stories like I, Robot in both its incarnations to an extent. You get that in stories like Blade Runner to an extent. Star Trek definitely. Uh and so on, so forth. Dead Space, you mentioned, example.
Oh, yeah, Dead Space is nice because even though the main thing you think of is that it's horror that leans on sci-fi, it actually cares more about the sci-fi aspect of it than most other, like, hybridizations do. Like, pretty much everything that happens in Dead Space revolves around and is because of both the setting where the technology exists and much of the technology itself. It's all blended together so seamlessly, even down to gonna break kayfabe for just a second. The mechanics of the fact that most of the tools you are using that work so well against these horrible, awful necromorph monsters are not meant to be weapons. They're actual tools either for construction or engineering, because 'cause you're playing as an engineer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's breaking the rules. It's still very much focused on the storytelling.
I talked about the gameplay for a
Portal
second.
is another good one like that, which is very
Portal.
much hard sci-fi where everything revolves around sci-fi elements, both between sort of rogue robot AI GLaDOS and also the technology you're using to solve the puzzles.
We love GLaDOS.
But it doesn't have to be that, which is interesting, right? Because the sci-fi elements can also take a back seat and just be the setting of a story whose various quirks and things lend themselves to exploring that narrative in a different way. A lot of sci-fi is a lot more rooted in the human element, the human drama, and the sci-fi setting is just a backdrop to allow you to explore that stuff with its various that with this technology and science of it being used to emphasize the human element instead of overshadow it. I would actually argue that a lot of the time sci-fi stories are at their best when the focus is less on the technology and more on the human or alien, you know what I mean, human quotation marks element, that sort of centralized character drama or plot drama or whatever, with the sci-fi elements just being used to enhance and highlight the things you want to showcase.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that partially comes from, generally I think generally genres are, they're a lot of times the genre you put a story in is it's a descriptor, but it's also like you could call it a mission statement. It's kind of both a goal and to a point a restriction because something can only be so many genres. If you know what genre you're going to make it in, you have to at least make it decent at being that thing, or it's probably not going to be good. And to a point, that puts at least a little bit of a chain on things from their genre most of the time. Except sci-fi can be used as the exact opposite when it is a quiet thing that's allowed to be in the background. Then the sci-fi becomes a tool of freedom. It just gives you the freedom to use all sorts of tools and interesting bits of technology and all sorts of visuals and ideas and sometimes even story beats that you just couldn't without the sci-fi.
A lot of sci-fi boils down to very grounded themes and philosophies, despite the sort of fantastical nature of the genre slash setting, right? You look at stuff like Close Encounters, Arrival, The Swarm, Star Trek, and all of these stories in some way or another are just all about communication, moving past cultural and societal and even biological differences to achieve a dialogue and communicate.
Yeah. Star Trek's not that far off from if we just made a show about an explorer exploring the world when most of the world was still unexplored. If if anybody in real life had ever had the resources and the kindness to do that without all the conquering and disease spreading.
Yeah, like there's still conflict in the Star Trek universe, but it is, I mean, I'm not an expert on it either by any means, but it's still a fairly utopic view of science fiction,
It is, yeah. In Star Trek, as I understand it, Earth itself is literally a utopia where
or close to. Yeah.
nobody has to work to live. Everybody is provided for. The planet has been restored to being like beautiful, and most of Earth's or most of the human population still lives there and still has a nice life. And pretty much everybody who works a job works that job because they want to be useful and or because they're passionate about it. So for the most part, like all the explorers and stuff, part of why they're so passionate and work so hard is because that's the whole reason they're there to begin with. They don't have to be there. They could be chilling back on Earth, living a easy life.
Yeah, then you've got stuff like, instead of communication, another one that comes up, quite often is, "Have we gone too far?" Or, "How far can and should we take our science?" And that's where you get stuff like, oh god, is it just called transhuman?
Transhumanism? Oh,
No,
the
the genre is I'm talking about, not,
um I don't actually know what it's called as a genre.
I mean, transhumanism is the idea of body modification. Transcendence, that's what I was thinking of, Johnny Depp movie, which
Ah,
is
yes.
dealing a lot with, like, advancing human identity and intelligence into, like, a digital hive mind overmind, is a good example. It sort of looks at it like, how much of this is okay? Is it okay at all? When do we cease to be human? Lucy is based on absolute bullshit. It's as soft as sci-fi as it gets, but deals with a similar idea. How far can we push ourselves before we're no longer humanity? A slightly more grounded version is, of course, Jurassic Park, which deals with this idea of, we have this technology to manipulate and control DNA, to clone things, and how moral is that? What are the dangers of that? Are we taking the science too far? Those are also very common themes.
I'm glad you brought up Jurassic Park. It had to be brought up because literally as soon as you mentioned going too far, I instantly heard in my head, "You were so obsessed with the idea of if you could, you never stopped to wonder whether you should," which is not an exact quote, but you know.
No, that's pretty much it. It was not the best impression of Jeff Goldblum ever.
Oh God, I don't want to do an impression of Jeff Goldblum. I don't think I can do that. I can do that first thing in the morning and still look at myself in the mirror.
But yeah, I mean, that is a very common idea explore. Even like Terminator deals with this to an extent. This idea of, technology has gone too far, and now we have to do something about it.
Yeah, transcendence also very frequently, but not always, intersects with cyberpunk. Or I guess I should say cyberpunk almost pretty much
Transhumanism.
always has transhumanism and transcendence in it to the point where you could cyberpunk is like half a subgenre of sci-fi, half a subgenre of transcendence, which is already kind of a subgenre.
I mean, transhumanism. You're thinking of Transcendence is the movie title, but
Oh. When you said the title, I thought you were trying to think of the name of a genre. Oopsie.
and transhumanism isn't really a genre; it's a concept that sometimes appears in a lot of genres, including cyberpunk, which is, as you said, despite its sort of very much having its own distinct vibe, is by default a sci-fi subgenre.
Can't have cyberpunk without the cyber.
Exactly, and it does often deal with these with this idea. Usually, it's more of a background thing, to be fair, but often does deal with this idea of transhumanism. How far can we push our humanity before we're not human anymore?
Yeah, especially cyberpunk itself,
Yeah.
which literally has cyber psychosis, which is like, hey, we're not robots. We're not built to be robots. Once people start replacing too much of themselves, they start also figuratively losing themselves to the point where at some point your brain is not wired up properly to like recognize yourself anymore and you go crazy.
Yeah. Conversely, of course, though, often sci-fi is used as a window to give a more positive view into the human experience. A look at what we could achieve and could become. Star Trek also falls into that course. That's not the right word.
I guess you
Camp,
could
I
kind of
guess.
call that like it's utopian, but it's like sci-fi is the genre that is occasionally an unironic version of utopian lacking in the sarcasm.
I mean, to be fair, it doesn't have to even be utopic. I would classify The Martian as in that sort of school of sci-fi, where it's all about, if we invest in the sciences and in human spirit and all these things, look at the difficulties we can overcome.
That's valid. That's a good way to put it.
Sci-fi makes for an excellent window to showcase both humanity's best traits and its worst because it puts the power in the character's hands to emphasize those traits.
You could say it's a Black Mirror to show us the reflections.
Hey, I got that reference.
Which I wish I had watched more Black Mirror. I need to because I think Black Mirror is a great thing to talk about for sci-fi too, even though it's not entirely consistent in its storytelling as a result
It'd
of
be
being
I say because it's an
anthological.
anthology, it would be really hard to do an episode on it, but it is worth mentioning because that's often very grounded sci-fi, and it does each and those episodes do deal with a lot of these common threads.
Yeah, well, because even though it's anthological, all of Black Mirror does share one theme, and it's literally like what if scenarios of like what's the freakiest, most nonsensical, make you stare at the screen and say, "What the fuck?" Like technological, not even always horrors, but technological oddities that actually very much could totally happen in our lifetimes if things went the right way. Some of it could happen right now.
Or at least within the next couple decades, depending on how advanced the
Like that first episode, the
that's very today-ish with the pig, yeah.
yeah, like it's for anybody who wants to be freaked out, watch Black Mirror. It's basically just the Twilight Zone, but revolving all around technology and also with an extra bit of scariness because a lot of it you could genuinely imagine really happening at some point.
Another sort of thing that sort of spins off this idea of taking science too far is sci-fi often incorporates a lot of metaphors about parenthood. Again, iRobot comes to mind as a bit of an example of that, although that's maybe a bit more the movie version, which has nothing to do with the book really. But also another really good example of that is Frankenstein, which a lot of people don't think of as sci-fi, but
I
it's
mean,
sci-fi.
he put a man together from pieces of other men and brought him to life with science. Pretty sci-fi.
Yeah, and that story, especially its original true incarnation, deals a lot with with the nature of parenthood and how you educate your children or do not educate them can impact the actions they take. It also, of course, does ask how far can we take science before it's too far. It's just another really good example of that.
Yeah, Frankenstein's monster didn't have to be a monster, but for anybody who doesn't know, Victor Frankenstein, not a good dad.
No.
Decent scientist. I wouldn't even say a great scientist. He could have done a much better job putting those bodies together and making it look like a guy, but, you know.
Well, I mean, the original isn't nearly as disturbing looking as later incarnations appear. Like, he's not the most good-looking guy ever for memory, but he doesn't have like the bolts in his neck or that weird cuboid head or any of that stuff that came in later.
I need to read the actual book so that I can canonize Mary Shelley's description in my head as what he should probably look like.
Also, he speaks and does so very eloquently.
Yeah, he doesn't even like. I believe the only reason he's kind of seen as a monster at all in that is fittingly for the themes because of what he is and how he was born, not how he looks. Like it's, if I remember right, the book's not really that much of a monster story.
No, it's a lot more. I mean, it is a horror story,
Yeah,
but it does. It's been a very long time since I've read any of it, also, but it does sort of lean a lot more into the "what have we done?" limits of science kind of side of things, rather than "ooh, scary monster,
you
pitchforks."
gotta love books that basically start out as dream journals. Mary Shelley had an awful nightmare and was like, I need to understand this. I need to be able to think about this. I'm writing that shit down. And people were like, why would you write that down? She was like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah,
And you know what? Joke's on them. She wrote one of the most famous books of all time.
yeah. So that's a lot about what sci-fi is, but I think we can also start to break. I mean, I know we can. We can start breaking it down into categories as well, because not all sci-fi is painted with the same brush, as we have just so clearly demonstrated. And that's not just down to the thematics of the genre and the setting of the story itself, but it does also come down to a crunchier, more mechanic sense as well. Because sci-fi is predominantly broken down into two classes. You've got hard science fiction and soft science fiction, and then there's like a spin-off of soft science fiction. There's also sci-fantasy.
Warhammer.
So your yeah. Uh, so your hard sci-fi is science fiction where the rules of the science are concrete and clear and are rooted in reality. They're generally based in actual scientific theories or even hard facts. The Swarm, again, is a really good example of this. All of the science in that story is grounded in things that are either theoretically plausible and very well thought out in how they are plausible, or in science and technology that actually exists and is happening as we speak. Similarly, Andy wears The Martian, which we also mentioned earlier. The story of one Mark Watney getting left behind on Mars after a manned mission goes very badly and having to survive there. All of the science in that story is at least theoretically plausible.
Yeah, it's something we at least already have the building blocks of written down, even if it hasn't been perfected and made manifest yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like hard sci-fi, I think people gravitate to less a lot of the time because it can get very dense and crunchy.
Yeah, I think it triggers for a lot of people the little voice in the back of the head screaming nerd.
But the world building and thought that goes into it, right, is so often so incredible.
Yeah, it's always really interesting because the harder you go on the science, that means the more heavily you have to directly take something that is real or, even theoretical. A lot of that theoretical stuff is technically not real yet, but on paper might as well be, and translate it into fiction, which is that's something people do a lot with like historical fiction and stuff, but I guess I would say with science it's entirely different because you are playing on a hard set of rules and math. You have to turn math into fiction.
Yeah, in a it's I mean, hard sci-fi is often can has been described as sci-fi where the math makes sense. I can't remember who it was that said that. But you're exactly right. It's exactly the same thing as when you're dealing with a hard magic system. When you're dealing with hard sci-fi, because the rules are very concrete and clear, your characters and the society that they are a part of have to exist and function according to those rules. They have to solve their problems within those rules. And that means there is inherently more tension built in, and it creates a much more grounded, realistic feeling. It makes it feel like something that could actually happen. And that's entirely because the science is plausible and well researched.
That's a lot of research you got to do too.
And it just makes for a very immersive world in a very different way than soft sci-fi does. Like I've started watching The Expanse, which is based on a series of books as well for an upcoming episode in this cycle. Surprise, that's coming up. And one of the things that I have constantly been impressed by is the thought put into how this solar system spanning society would function. Not only the like political cultural differences, but also how gravity affects things. People who live in the mining colonies in the asteroid belt, for example, or the research facilities around the gas giants, things like that, their bodies have been warped by lesser gravity. They are often tall and narrow, and they struggle when they're on Earth. Those rare occasions they get to be because the gravity is so much stronger. It makes them feel like they're being compressed because they are. It pays a lot of thoughts to how ships would actually move in space, how the maneuvering would work, for example, how you would have to use a lot of like magnetism to readily navigate a ship without true artificial gravity because that's not an easy thing to have.
I like the idea of using magnets to float around.
It's less magnets to float around; it's more to stay stuck to a ship. Think
There.
mag boots from Star Wars.
Iron boots from Legend of Zelda. Got it.
Sure. Hard sci-fi it is often an exercise in world building. One of my favorite hard sci-fi series is actually a documentary series, weirdly. It's on Netflix, it's called Alien Worlds, and it is a thought experiment.
Ooh.
It's all fiction, but it basically is like, imagine these worlds, these planets. Now we're going to talk to some science fiction people, some biologists, physicists, astrophysicists, that sort of thing, and we're going to work with them to basically world build these different planets and moons and societies and animal species, and we're going to discuss and think about what life in these planet on these worlds would be like, how it would function. So they've got like a world with a very thick atmosphere. So there's a lot of creatures that live in the air and stay airborne most of their lives. And because it's so dense in oxygen, there's a lot of dense plant growth, for example.
Ooh.
I believe the last episode deals with what happens if all of the society's intelligent life forms basically decide to go full transhumanism and just upload all of their minds into some giant machine and then just have robots floating around to take care of the limited biological functions. They just get to live entirely inside a computer civilization.
No, that's fun.
I highly recommend finding this documentary series and watching it if you can.
Yeah, I gotta take a look.
There was another very similar show I saw years before it as well, which was very good. Apologies if I sound kind of funny all of a sudden. I've just had to put like a mint in my mouth because my mouth is so fucking dry.
How could you sound so funny? What's wrong with you? Are you some sort of clown?
No, that's a different cycle.
Oh no.
Hmm. You're probably thinking horror round two, but no, it's a cycle entirely on Clan. No.
Just the clown cycle. Only clown, all clowns. Honk.
The funniest thing is I guarantee we could do it.
Oh yeah. Oh, we absolutely could. I immediately thought of 4 different clowns who are all still definitely technically clowns, but entirely different flavors of character and clown.
But yeah, that's hard sci-fi. Conversely, soft sci-fi is where the actual functionality of the technology is largely hand-waved because of its advancement, and because there is little to no actual science to base it in, either because it doesn't exist yet or it is physically impossible. But they can hand-wave that by going, well, society is just so advanced here that they can achieve these things that are beyond us. And because it is so far beyond us, we can't really give a detailed explanation for how it works. Or, alternatively, the science doesn't need to be explained because it's not the key point of the story.
Yeah.
And that's where you get your Star Trek and Dune as two opposite sides of that spectrum.
Ooh.
And that soft sci-fi is interesting because on paper you would think that it would not lead to as immersive a world because the mechanics of it are less clearly defined, and yet often sci-fi worlds are extremely immersive in their own way, based on the sort of just vibe and culture of it all, as opposed to the mechanics.
Ah. Sorry, my cats are being chaotic. They are very angry that I didn't feed them before the podcast, despite the fact that it's not really their breakfast time yet.
That sounds about right. And I don't know, soft sci-fi is interesting because on paper, I think I gravitate more to, same as with fantasy, more to things with hard, understandable rules. But I've enjoyed a fair share of soft sci-fi.
Oh yeah, I like me some soft sci-fi.
And I think part of the reason for that is because soft sci-fi, the science fiction part is rarely the main focus of the story. It is mostly a backdrop. It is a very good example of what we were talking about earlier, where the setting and its capabilities allows for acts to highlight the human element and put a different lens on things more than it is about problems born from the technology or technology as a solution to
Yeah,
problems.
you could argue that the sci-fi isn't an integral piece of the whole thing, but it's still very nice and is a thing there that it would not be the same without, because it's an extra toolbox. You got a whole nother box of tools to play around with by adding in sci-fi.
Yeah, the danger, of course, with soft sci-fi is, by that token, also it's the same danger that is present in soft fantasy. Because the technology can be basically anything, it absolutely cannot be the solution to your character's the problems, the conflict in your story.
Because everybody's gonna know right away. It's like, oh, you just made that up. You just said that solved the problem.
Yeah, it's great if you want it to be the cause of a problem in theory, although because it has to be grounded in the setting's reality in a way, there's a little less flexibility there than with soft fantasy, but it's the same general rule. If you're gonna do soft sci-fi, it can the science stuff can cause the problem, but it can rarely fix it, not on its own, because there are no rules, it's too easy to just go, "And it's fixed."
Oh, look, we fixed it.
And that's very unsatisfying to a reader. So you've either got to make that kind of secondary to a lot of the drama or not part of it at all.
Good job, everybody. We did it. I guess all along we truly were the science fiction.
Yeah, you don't want your soft sci-fi to give the same vibe as a wizard did it.
Yeah.
So if you're working in a sci-fi setting and going very soft sci-fi, You need to double down and focus even more on the political and cultural and human drama that is present in the setting. Whether the sci-fi element contributes to that or not, it probably does because you should always be aware of the world your characters exist
True.
in soft sci-fi, the science itself can't be the be all and end all of the story. It feels too low stakes. It breaks immersion, and ultimately that makes it less satisfying. But if you craft a beautiful soft sci-fi world and use that as a lens to highlight that human element, it can become very engrossing. Again, look how big the followings for Dune or Star Trek are. That's not those stories aren't big because of the crazy technology present in them. It's because of the cultural and political and human drama that occurs within the context of those settings.
Can't believe how hard Dune has popped off after all these years of just sitting in the background being a good book nobody wanted to translate into a movie after the first try.
I mean, it's a big story, June,
Oh man.
and a very vast world, so it's understandable that it's been difficult to condense it down to movie
And
format.
also one of, if not the inspiration for Star Wars.
Definitely a big part of it. I mean, look at Tatooine.
Tatooine is literally just Doom Planet. Star Wars literally also has a drug called spice. It's
Yeah.
the main drug in this setting. uh,
Yeah, I mean, the influences are visible. It's a lot of Dune, a lot of classic hero's journey stuff. It's still its own thing, but if you look for it, you can see the influence.
yeah.
A lot of samurai flicks and war movies inspired it too. Like Vader's whole look and everything, and the idea of the lightsabers, all very inspired by like Kurosawa's movies. And speaking of Star Wars, that is a good leaping point because soft sci-fi has a sort of like spin-off category of its own, sci-fantasy, which is a naturally a hybrid setting slash genre where technology and magic are integrated together. Often one is the basis for the other, and that further removes the science from reality.
True.
And like Star Wars is a really good example of that. It is a setting which is very futuristic. Many different planets, alien races, spaceships with faster than light travel, droids walking around, all this very science fiction stuff. But at the same time, the Force exists. The what are they called? The Night Sisters on Dathomir, their version of the Force is literally called magic.
They got their witch magic.
And whether you want to admit or not, the Force is a magic system.
It's honestly something I'm really glad for the existence of because there's so many people who think of the Force, for one thing, only in the terms of the movies, but even some of the people who like other stuff are like, yeah, we've seen time and time again that the Force is this, the Force is that, the light side is this, the dark side is that, and Dathomir's just sitting over there being completely its own thing that doesn't follow any of those rules or any of those logic or any of that morality. And you're like, but what about over there? What are they doing over there? And they're like, don't look over there. Mind your business.
Yeah, the acolytes, which faction? Similar story. And that's the thing, right? Like that, it is a soft fantasy magic system because let's be honest, the Force can be just about fucking anything
Yeah.
inside a setting that is soft sci-fi, and they've just melded together to become this wacky, wonderful tapestry of a setting where so many different stories can be told based on either the tech or the magic or both.
Yeah.
I think that one thing is, yeah, one thing I've noticed, I don't think I've ever seen like a hard magic system combined with soft sci-fi or a soft magic system combined with hard sci-fi. I don't think I've ever seen that,
I
really.
don't think I have either. I think it has the potential to be really interesting, but that's got to be categorically hard to make work.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you could almost tell a story there, and maybe I will because I haven't written. We'll see what I come up with, but I haven't written the story for the cycle yet. But I could see one where you dealt with that clash between the people who have to operate within hard rules versus the people who get to break those rules as much as they want. I would probably lean, of course, to soft magic versus hard tech. But
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Is generally for a system for there to be a hard system a story runs on or as a part of, it kind of has to be it gives that system inherently a certain number of dominance. Having 2 of those that share a lot, both exist and both be hard, like, is so easy to make that clash. I'm sure it's possible to make work, but
I mean, I think you'd have to lean into the clash real to make it, like, really stand out. Like,
that's
I
true.
imagine a setting, right, where
Science versus
you've
magic.
got not even versus necessarily, but I can imagine, like, like, your hero crew having a mage and a tech guy in the same, like, ship or whatever, and there being this constant rivalry because the tech guy is actually smart and has to think about shit and the mage doesn't, they can just do things. But also the tech guy has jealousy over the mage because whilst the mage can just magic things into existence, they have to actually work within the bounds of reality and thus have jealousy over what they can accomplish. You could do a lot with that.
True.
And I'm sure some stuff has touched on that within reason, because like obviously a lot of superhero settings are basically sci fantasy.
Yeah, you could have a lot of fun with it. Like, for instance, the magic person, in a way, wouldn't have any of his own power. The tech person knows how to make things work, and has to and knows how to use them. What does the magic person do if they go into a place that has no magic or no energy to draw from, or their own tools get broken and they can't just fix them? Because you can fix tech, but how often can you just fix magic?
Yeah, there's some stuff to do there. I'm not making any promises. Don't get excited, audience, but maybe that's what I'll use for my story this cycle.
It's time for the natural follow up, everybody, to pirates versus ninjas, nerds versus nerds.
Of course, Star Wars is not the only example of sci fantasy that has become very prominent. Doctor Who has been going on for decades and is very prominently sci fantasy.
Warhammer 40K exists, although we don't need to get into that. I love it so much, but it's also so stupid.
And a much more recent example, which actually does do a little bit of this magic versus technology stuff, is Arcane.
That's true. Arcane is it's basically what we just described, but both systems are soft.
Yeah, and it's not. It's the like the core of the conflict isn't really rooted in science versus tech, but it does form a part of some of the conflicts, especially within the sort of Piltover group of characters, because of this idea of in the history of that world in Runeterra, they had at one point a couple centuries back there was something called the Rune War, in which magic was used to cataclysmic effect. And now in the modern day, you've got these young up and coming science guys going, we have worked out that it is possible to use technology to harness magic, which not many people can do anymore.
And if you could make technology that harnesses magic, you could do it. y- You could have cleaner burning. Well, whatever. It would be a lot safer. More or less, it takes the chaos. You take the chaos out of the magic with your science.
Kind of, but also it's a very uncharted territory, and they're sort of going, look, think of all the good we can do because magic can do all this stuff. If we have this technologically implemented magic, it would make it more widely accessible, and we can use it to better our society. And then you have Heimerdinger, who was part of a very long-lived race, who was around for the Rune War, going, magic is fucking scary. Slow right down.
Yeah, Heimerdinger, I was really shocked to see what an interesting character Heimerdinger was, and what an interesting, specifically, position he was put in Arcane, because he's simultaneously like the most open-minded of like all the council members, and like the kindest, the most like in favor of progress and creativity, and the young taking over and doing their thing. It's just this one specific thing he has hardcore, that the entire world has PTSD over, but he also has personal PTSD over, because he was there, and he's so stuck on, yeah, you're doing great, I get what you're doing, but oh god, like the way it went last time, I don't, you should just not even bother. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. You weren't there. You don't know. It was horrible.
Yeah, don't spend a couple of years working on this. You spend decades making sure this is safe. And of course, there's the conflict because the humans are like, bro, we don't live centuries. We can't spend decades upon decades doing this, or it's not gonna happen. And that is a little bit. And the funny thing is, like, that is. it highlights so well how vast a sci-fi slash sci-fantasy setting can be, because that makes up, especially in season one, such a small portion of the conflict. It becomes a bit more prominent in season two, especially towards the latter like third of it. But even then, there's so much other drama, both character and plot wise, going on that it only makes up a part of it.
I can't wait to finally watch season 2.
It's very good. And that's one of the things that's so cool about sci-fi, right? Is that it so often provides a really interesting backdrop to explore very human ideas. And because of the way the world can be built, they can really focus in on these things that other stories can't or don't, because they could use that technology to really focus in on aspects of human consciousness and personality and culture and society.
Which is so funny because, like, that's again a thing where, at least as story elements, magic and science have so much overlap, which I guess makes sense because, I mean, in most of the best magic systems, the magic is treated as a science.
Well, yeah. Even in a soft magic system, often it is implied that there are rules to it. It's just that we as the audience are never really given what those rules are.
We're only given some of the rules because we don't have years to study it or a bunch of books on it to read.
Yeah. I mean, soft sci-fi does basically the same thing. It's technology. There is obviously science behind it that makes it function, but we are only given the loosest, most gibberish explanations of what those things are, because it's not actually physically possible all of the time, and it's not necessarily something we need to know. All we need to know is ship runs on X, can do Y. Often the hyperdrive is broken.
The hyperdrive is always broken. The hyperdrive never works. You know why? Because hyperdrives are busted. How are you supposed to get into any trouble if you could, for all intents and purposes, portal out?
Exactly. And I mean, that's highlighting that danger of a soft sci-fi right there, is that it's very easy for the flexibility of the science to make for an easy out to any problem, and that reduces tension. I suppose one last thing I wanted to highlight is I wanted to go back to this idea that we keep coming back to once more. This idea of sci-fi being a very good genre for exploring very grounded human concepts, right? Because we've talked about some really fantastical things, so I want to draw a real world parallel to maybe crystallize this idea of why it works so well, for the audience. I would like you now to think about the internet. Think about how it's only been around for, a few decades, really, and it certainly only really became prominent in, like, the late '90s, early 2000s. Think about how that technology has now shaped our society and the elements of our human strengths, flaws, cultures, personalities, all of that, how they have been emphasized by this interconnectivity and instantaneousness of the internet.
It's crazy to think that something that is such a massive part of so many lives all around the entire world, even rules many lives, has its own economy, funds a couple societies here and there, barely existed when I was born. When I was born, the
Yeah,
internet was a tiny little baby thing. I didn't even hear about the internet till I was like 10 or 15 years old because even though it existed back then, it didn't really matter. Most people didn't have access to it, and half the people who could have access to it didn't understand it enough to even try to use it.
yeah, I mean, this is a real technology that exists right now. You're on it listening to this, and
We're doing an internet right now.
think of how much that technology has shaped society. Think of how social media has shaped society and human interaction. Think of all the incredible things that we can accomplish through the power of this technology, both good and evil. If that doesn't explain to you why sci-fi is an amazing genre for exploring like philosophy around human nature and and humans' relationship with technology, I don't know what will.
Sorry, my thumb just got sliced open by a cat.
Oh, fun.
I was resting my hand on the arm of the chair next to me, and Bruno stretched to sharpen his claws, and I guess didn't look where he was going. I know he didn't do it on purpose because he's much more gentle than that.
It's fine. I think we can probably wrap that up there anyway, so
Yeah,
we'll
I
we
am
can
gonna
close
wrap it
off
up.
and you
Actually,
can
thank you.
Yeah, I was like, we can wrap up the episode, close it up, and then you can go and wrap up your finger or thumb or whatever it was.
It was my thumb, yep. Big ol' hole.
Get some of that fancy sci-fi skin mending spray.
You know, I do have liquid bandage. It's close.
Getting there. So if you guys are listening to this over on Spotify or YouTube or wherever else it has appeared, you can find these episodes on my site, radfordwrites.com as well. You can also read sort of blog entries and articles. I'm trying to get sort of two of those up a month currently. You can read stories, including the ones for these episodes on the site as well as find links to buy my books or listen to other content I produce. And you can find John streaming and on YouTube as Sephir, Sephear.
Yes, I'm gonna do many good things. Buy the books, they're good, and watch my stuff. There's not very much now, but there's gonna be, and it's gonna be good. I have a better mic now. That helps.
Yeah, all the cat clunking in the background no one could hear anymore is now audible.
And listen, they wouldn't be clunking around so much if I had fed them. Most of the clunking you heard wasn't actually the background. It was them crawling over all over my desk and their tails slapping my boom or the mic.
Another problem solved by technology, another problem caused. How fitting. Well, we'll see what that turns into next week. Goodbye, guys.
Doodles.